Hello, it is April 19th. It's Monday, and we are almost getting towards the end of our class. So I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. I think this has been great. Although the best part about this past week has been looking at your discussions and watching you read the books. It's so nice to actually see your faces. I absolutely love it. So some things we need to remember when we're reading books out loud to children is always make sure everybody can see the pictures. So sometimes even when we have it turned towards ourselves so we can see it and then show them the pictures, that's completely fine. And make sure we slow down and read it enough read it slow enough so that the kids and your audience is going to understand what's going on, hearing the sequencing, listening to those rhyming, and especially looking at those pictures. Those are the best part. So if your book kind of builds on words and pictures together, which most picture books do, the kids are going to want to hear and see and be engaged with those. So give them the time and show them the pictures for sure. Another thing is to remember to always say the name of the author and the illustrator before you start, and or after, whatever is easiest for you. There's a couple reasons for this. Now, not every student is going to remember every author, every illustrator, everything. That's totally fine. But what you're doing is you're planting seeds so that comprehension and those questions they have to answer later on are going to become a little easier. For example, so if you keep talking about the author's name is this, and then later on when they get to be third, fourth grade, then we want the author's point of view. And to already know pretty concrete that this is what an author does, and this is what they're thinking while they're writing the story, that would be helpful. Another thing is if we have an author, if it's a name or an illustrator that's a name that we really know and children love, then they can go seek out other books with that name. For instance, I was teaching elementary school, and the big one was Mo Willems. Everybody loved his books. So he did the Piggy and Gerald books, the Knuffle Bunny books, the Naked Mole Rat books. So any of those that my students were like, oh, he came out with another one, they would race the library and they would be picking them out, which is amazing. That's exactly what we want students to do for Children's Lit. So very good. And I totally enjoyed seeing you and hearing your stories this week. That's great. So next week, we've got this big paper coming up, the annotated bibliography. But in fact, 2 of you have already turned them in to me, so nice job. The rest of you, if some of you had questions, totally fine. Let's get those answered. Let's clear them up. So here's the directions for the assignment. And I've had 2 people ask this question, so I assume most of us are going to have that same question. Is if I have a book, how many books will it count for if it clicks a lot of those boxes, checks a lot of those boxes? So for instance, if you have a book and it has won an award and it's about a diversified student and it's nonfiction, then you've already hit 3 categories. That doesn't mean you've read 3 books. It means you've read 1 book in 3 categories. So you still need to have 25 picture books. You still need to have 10 chapter books, but we can make sure that those boxes, if you're checking those off to make sure you got them all, fits it. Now, this week we're going to be reading El Defo. Some of you may have already read it. So let's think about that. That has won a Newbery Honor Award. That would be one of your books that did that. It also is a graphic novel, so that's a different kind of genre, and it's about a disability. So then you've got your diversification right there. So that novel alone is going to hit 3 things. And it doesn't mean you have to have every book hit more than 1. But it frees you up for a little bit later on. So if you've already got a couple of books with, these things already done, then the next books you don't have to make sure it doesn't have to fit every single category. I hope that makes sense. So for total, we need 35 books. And so 25 year picture books, 10 chapter books, and use the ones we've had in class. Absolutely. For the picture books, use the ones that are on the video screens, the video clips that we have in our class. Absolutely. Get Storyline online. Those work. Find some on YouTube. That's great. Go to the local library and just, picture book, just read them all pretty quick. The 10 chapter books, a little bit more difficult. They're a little bit more time, but not the end of the world. We've already read several of them already. So just let me know if I can answer any of your questions. I'd be happy to help. So when you actually turn in your assignment, this is what we want right here. So a summary is a brief summary because most of your time on this book is going to be their personal reflection, and then how you're going to use that in your classroom. So it's 1 good paragraph per idea. So if you have 10 paragraphs or 10 ideas, like I said last time, then you're going to need 10 paragraphs. But let's just shorten that up for the sake of time. So it really should be a paragraph. So if you're just giving me little blurbs or a thought or two on here, let's rethink that. Let's make sure it's a good solid paragraph on how you're going to use this, because really that question is the basis of this entire class. So it's exposure, and then how are you going to take this exposure stuff that you've been learning in this class with different genres and different books, and how are you going to use it in your classroom? That's the whole idea. So if you have any other questions, please let me know. I can Zoom, I can video chat, we can call, I can email. You tell me what you need and we'll get it figured out. If you need more time, let me know that as well, so then we can be cognizant of what's happening in our classes to make sure we're keeping up. So for this week, we are going to be reading El Deafo, and some of you may have already read the book. It is a graphic novel. And graphic novels, I have to say, are hard to read out loud to students. Well, first of all, because they're like comic books. They're like a novel comic book. So every little section is going to have different tinier pictures, are harder to see for the whole class, and it doesn't read as a narrative where you're going to take the beginning of the story and it just flows through what's happening with this little girl, but it's going to be different chunks, and so it's very hard to do this as a read aloud, so I probably wouldn't do it as a read aloud. And as we talked about last week, the reading level and the content level are different. This is definitely a good time to catch those struggling readers, maybe in 5th and 6th grade, because it is a little bit higher understanding content, but the words actually are a lower reading level. So you can kind of think about what is the use of this in your classroom. So graphic novels, I've got a couple different things up here. This is from the website Cult of Pedagogy, which is kind of great. I follow this one because they have a really good ideas on how to teach things, how to think about things differently in your classroom and make sure we are touching everything. So this teacher right here had a great suggestion, and she said that she feels that because her struggling readers were more visual learners, that they really enjoyed the graphics and the words are more approachable, the images support the comprehension, and so then they can feel confident in finishing a novel because they can finish at the same time as everybody else. And so what I like about that is when she said they really have a strong sense of character because they can put themselves in those visual pictures. There's always that support for those visual learners all the time. And we think about, you can talk about, voice and character and perspective and put all those things that you're teaching with your novels into graphic novels as well, for especially your lower readers, or if you just want to break from the regular novel where it's a lot of heavy reading. So they're good for that way. Another website I saw is in education. It's like utopia.org, and it also has a great blog on here. And this is like using graphic novels and comic strips in your classroom. What would be the benefits and what would be the drawbacks? So I would highly recommend looking at some of those so you can kind of think about things. So your assignment this week in the discussions is how would you teach graphic novels in your classroom? It can be this novel, El Deafo. If you choose to look at a different graphic novel, that's totally fine. But if we're using El Deafo, I want you to tell us, hold on one second here. Sorry about that. So if you are going to be using El Deafo, I want you to tell us, like, what did you like about it? What did you not like about it? But more specifically, how would you teach graphic novels in your classroom, or would you even have them in your classroom? If you are thinking a different graphic novel and want to use that one as an example, that's completely fine. I still expect you to read El Deafo and have some comments on it, but if you want to teach a different graphic novel in your classroom, that's completely fine. So if you are teaching younger students, is graphic novels appropriate? The answer would be yes or no. If it's depending on which graphic novel it is. Sometimes for those students who are great readers when they're pretty younger, you can probably find graphic novels that are appropriate for that age level, and then they're going to be reading chapter books, which is a really big thing in those younger grades. But more often you're going to be using it as older grades for those struggling readers, but not all the time. So your assignment is, how are you going to use graphic novels in your classroom? How would you teach them? How would you teach graphic novels? And that's kind of a loaded question because there's no right or wrong answer to that. A lot of the questions I'm asking you do not have any right or wrong answers. It's just like, what would you do? But I think there's a place for it, because if we only teach the genres that we're comfortable with and the only ones that we are familiar with, we are really missing out on a whole bunch of opportunities to share with our students. So, in a nutshell, by this week we would like you to have up on the discussions how you would teach graphic novels in your classroom, either using examples from El Defo. Tell us what you think about the book, or if you if you don't want to use El Defo in your classroom, that's fine. Tell us about another graphic novel that you would like to teach in your classroom, or if you would, and please tell us what you think about El Defo in that situation as well. You don't have to love it, that's totally fine. You don't have to hate it, that's totally fine, but I want your opinion. Remember, this class is about exposure as well. So we want that done by this week. On the 25th is when your annotated bibliography is due. Like I said, some of you have already got it turned in. That's fabulous. And if you have questions, let me know. I'm here to help you out. But you are getting close to the end. So since we're thinking about this big assignment, after this big assignment, we're going to be announcing the final coming up pretty soon. And in the final, you need to have a Newbery Award-winning book. So if you can get started on reading that, if you are done with your bibliography, of course, that would become first, but your Newbery Award-winning book is going to be what we're going to be using for the final. Everybody's going to pick something different. That's completely fine, and I will be announcing what that is in the next week or so. I hope that wasn't too confusing. All right. See you guys.